So we are going to be in the book of Matthew, chapter 14 this morning, and the last half, and starting verse 22. And so we were looking at this. I want to ask you guys this question. And the question is, are you disappointed right now? That's a pretty bold question. Is there something that you're struggling with right now? And a lot of people, they get uncomfortable when trying to ask this stuff. And there's some people that as soon as you ask them, hey, what's going on in your life? They're going to sit and tell you like a whole 3-4 hours worth, and you're just like, I was just checking to say hi, and that's it. But like a lot of people, they'll come out and they'll tell you exactly what's going on. So disappointments come on. So disappointments and struggles are a huge part of our lives that come up, and how do we respond to those? You could be in a point right now that you might be going through a marriage that's been broken, struggling in your marriage of communicating, connecting. You might have a child that has walked away from the Lord, that's kind of going on doing their own thing, and you're doing everything you can. You've gotten to that point, and you're just like, there's nothing else I can do. You might have even gotten to the point that you've lost your job, and you're like trying to figure out the next steps. You get flooded with so much information to come up going, what do I do next? You might not like your job. That's also a possibility. I've been in several jobs that I didn't like, but I had to keep working because it was either that or I had nothing. So you might not like your job. You might have found yourself in a financial stress to where you're like, oh my gosh, these new bills, these different things have come up. What are we going to do? Where do we turn? How are we going to fix this? You might have even found out a medical diagnosis to where you found out something that pretty devastating you were not expecting. Stuff that changes the course of your life, changes your mindset, changes the way that you function and interact with people around, and even in your daily life and your daily schedule. And then lastly, you could have possibly lost a family member, someone that was very close to you, someone who's had an impact in your life that you're like, I don't know what I would do without that person in my life. Now they're gone. So disappointments and struggles come up. And so when life does not go the way that we think it's supposed to, how do we respond? The biggest thing that happens is stuff happens, and there's always a response. Always a response to everything. And it could be a negative response, it could be a positive response, or you might be like, I'm just not going to respond at all. But it's a response. So when life doesn't go that way, how do we respond? How do we react? And how are we supposed to respond? How are we supposed to be in these things? And so if we all had the opportunity that when things come up, we had plenty of time to think and function and react and had all the stuff laid out ahead of us, we all could probably choose and make the right decision pretty quickly. But when it comes down to it, we don't really have all that information in front of us. Stuff happens so quick to where it's like we respond in an instant. I mean, give you another example. If you walk through your house in the middle of the night with the lights off, you're like, oh, I know the house, and you kick that coffee table with hit that little pinky toe like everyone's probably done 1,000 times. Your response is never going to be good. Like, oh, I'm so glad that's there. No, you're going to be like going, oh man, I'm going to get rid of this thing. Why do we even have it? It's not even worth anything. It's just there. It holds nothing except for what I said on it, then I push it off. So our response happens in an instant. So we're going to be looking at how we respond to stuff, but before we begin, before we begin on how we should respond to disappointments, I want us to think how we respond in reality. How we respond when things go wrong. And I think it goes something like this. We respond in fear. We respond where we doubt God. We start to blame God. We get angry at God. We maybe even respond to everyone else and anything else and put all the blame on them going, well, if this hadn't happened, then everything would be okay. Everything would be fine. Or maybe we blame ourselves so much that it paralyzes. That we become so complacent, that we become so to the point of like, if I just don't do anything, it will go away. And a lot of people get stuck in one of these different responses to where sometimes the response could have happened to where they just start withdrawing from church. They start withdrawing from God. They start withdrawing from the community that they've been placed in. Because they're like going, I don't want to burden other people with my problems. I don't want to burden other people with stuff that's going on in my life, with the turmoil, the chaos. So I'm just going to withdraw. We stop tending. We allow our disappointments and our struggle have nothing to do with the church. We just withdraw anyways because we're like going, that can't fix my problem. So let me focus and let me get around here and try to fix this. And then when everything is good, I'll go back. And guys, that's a horrible response to have, because when we do that, we start saying that we have found the answer, that's something better. But what the real response of that is that that's the enemy stepping in, trying to isolate you. Taking you through these difficulties and being like, see, look, you're all alone. You have nothing. You should do this, try to handle it on your own. Because the enemy wants us to be separated from our fellow brothers and sisters. They want us to be separated to where we take all the burden onto ourselves. And so we end up forgetting the true response of what we're supposed to do. And so we feel like we're in those valleys. That's when the isolation happens. And then that's where our response is either positive or negative. And when I say positive or negative, there's always more than one response to things. But we always choose the worst ones at the quickest because it's easy. It's our default. It's something to go through. Because if we had to go through the other response and choose the positive, we know that there's work. And when we work, yes, it comes out a lot better, but there's a long road where we know we got to get from here to there. That's where if I just stay right here and wallow in my anger, wallow in my frustrations, going, it's not worth it. I'm going to stay right here. We'll be okay. It becomes easier. We become so complacent and so paralyzed. So that's how we think we should be doing. When we're not thinking straight, we focus on the negative of everything. So we're going to be looking on how we should be responding to where Melanie and I, when we first got married, we were living in Central Virginia. We were around our college that we had both went to. She grew up in Central Virginia, so we had lived there, and we enjoyed it. We had a great community, a great church that we were involved in, a great group set of friends that we did life with. And it was such a great time to where we also had our family and everything, and we just enjoyed where we were at. We both had the idea come across our minds and our hearts. We knew God was leading to this because God was calling us to minister in Florida somewhere. I knew that I wanted to be a youth pastor somewhere, and God kept putting Florida on my mind. And then when Melanie and I got married, I started learning that Florida had been on her heart as well before we even started dating, before we got married. And so we're thinking, all right, awesome. This is a no-brainer. You want to go to Florida? I want to be in Florida. Let's do this. Now, for me, being in Florida was not what most people think about being in Florida. One, because I hate the beach. Okay? So right there, that's the first strike right there, because the sand, no, I just can't deal with that. I'll go, but that's it. I don't want to live there. Okay, because sand is horrible, all right? So a lot of you guys can probably debate me and tell me differently. That's okay. We'll talk later. But that was one thing there. I was like, man, okay, all right. And plus, two, it's hot all the time. I like a little bit of cold every once in a while. I don't want to be sweating 1,000 times every single day. So there was some negative things on my part there. But Melanie and I, we both had this desire to go to Florida. And we were like going, okay, I guess this is where God is wanting us to go. We were involved in a great small group to where the small group ended up picking up and going down to Tampa area and planting a church. And we're like, wow, like God is just opening even more doors. We're in this small group. Florida's been laid on our heart even before this group decided that they were going to go down to Florida and plant a church. We're like, man, yes, we're right on the right path. We started looking more into it, more praying, kept praying, and we're like, all right, guys, we're going to make this decision. We're going to move to Florida. Well, we moved everywhere but Tampa. We moved to Fort Lauderdale, and I went without a job. Melanie had a teaching job, and then I ended up getting a job a few months later after being down there. Very fast-paced life, huge city. I come from a town of probably 3,000, moved into a town of millions. Huge difference, very fast-paced life. I finally got a job, did not like the job. It was a job to pay the bills, but I couldn't stand being in it because there was so much anxiety, so much stress, so much pressure to constantly do stuff, and I was having to learn 10 times faster than when I was working. And so one, I hated the job. Melanie ended up not liking her job as well because of the pressures that were put on her to things that she saw as a teacher she was struggling with. And so here he is. We got one thing against us. One of our disappointments, our jobs are not what we wanted. I was wanting to be serving in a church, working with youth somewhere in some capacity, but instead I'm installing security cameras, burglar alarms, and trying to keep people out. And so it was a disappointment that I had there, and I was like, man, God, I just got so frustrated. Secondly, we ended up getting to a church that we didn't like very much. Everybody kept us like on an arm's length of stuff, and we're going, why can we not get connected with anyone? What is going on? I was like, I know I talk a little bit different with a little withdrawal, probably a little bit slower. What's going on? And so that was a frustration there to where we enjoyed the church, we enjoyed the teaching and stuff, but then it was just, we couldn't get into the community. And so Melanie and I felt isolated. We were around her family. Her family had moved with us all at the same time, so it was just us and her family, but we weren't branching out to connect with other people around. So that was a disappointment that we were finding. And so with all that, it started taking tolls in our daily lives, in our marriage, in our ministry, because we were looking at it going, well, I'm equipped for this. I can do this. Why can I not do it? And I looked at God and I was going, God, for 10 years I have studied, and for 10 years I have served, volunteered, and gave everything I can. Why can I not do what you've called me to do? I responded out of frustration and out of anger, and I said, God, what is it? What gives? And so what came with that was I wasn't allowing God to use us, to use Melanie and I. And on top of that, Melanie and I just became very lonely. Because we weren't in community. It was just us. And we loved each other, and we loved being around each other because we knew that together we were doing something that God had called us out to do. But instead, it wasn't what we had thought it was going to be like. Because everybody sees Florida, oh, the Sunshine State. Everybody goes there to retire, have fun, and all this. And I was going, no, I want to go and connect with people and share about Jesus. Why is this so difficult? Because most times everybody see like, oh, it's easy to share about Jesus. But it's easy to share about Jesus when you're doing what you think you're supposed to be doing. So my response, and Melanie's response, as you guys can see, was completely horrible. We were disappointed, and we responded in the wrong ways to where we were like, I don't know what else to do. We're just going to move away from here. This is not where we want to be. We started just continuing to isolate ourselves and stay so focused on our heart's desire. And so looking at this, we're going to look at the proper way that we should respond. Straight out of Scripture when it comes to the storms and the disappointments and everything in our lives. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. I want to start reading in verse 14, or verse 22, 14, and it says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, and there he was alone. And the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffered by the waves of the wind and against it. So I want to stop right there, and I want to look at this. Here we see that Jesus and the disciples, they just finished feeding the 5,000 and got all this extra food left, and so the crowds, they were like moving in. They're like, oh, Jesus is so awesome. They were so excited of what Jesus was doing. But they were wanting to put Jesus in a place of leadership and position in their lives that Jesus wasn't there to do. Jesus was there to heal them and teach them and connect them back to God. And they wanted to make him like a king and put him up this way. So he separated the disciples and sent them on ahead, and he went himself to kind of pray and to focus on what God was already doing. So we see that Jesus is already doing this. And so we want to focus on the point here is to remember. To remember throws up a lot of different things. If I were to ask you, what is your favorite memory, you could tell me. Everybody can instantly go back to their memory right now. Something that happened today, something that happened last night, something good, something bad. But our memory serves of things that have happened in the past. And so we see this, that Jesus has separated them from the crowds and separated him from himself to focus on God. And so now we're about to get into the point of once this happens, once we start to remember, we start to realize what Jesus has done in our lives, how he separates us from the crowds, when he comes into our lives, when we look at Jesus and recognize him as Lord and Savior. we start to realize he's doing something. He's already done something. But yet we forget about it so quick. Because we can get on this mountaintop high like the disciples and where Jesus was around these crowds going, man, I just seen him feed 5,000 people. And now, a lot of this gets lost in translation of 5,000 people. That was just the men. That wasn't even counting the women and the kids. So it could have probably doubled to even more than 10,000 people. So look at this and you see this grand thing that Jesus has done. He's doing all this, but then he separates us and we start to move to the next thing. We all get through moments in our lives where we're on this mountaintop high and we're like, man, this is so great. Jesus was doing so good, man. I'm so pumped. We go away to a retreat. We get around a group of guys' Bible studies. We just talk to our best friend and we're connecting and we're saying, man, it feels so great. I love listening and connecting to them. God has done so much. He's shown me so much. He has allowed me to step away from all the junk in my life to where I can focus solely on Him. And so then we get out of there and we're like, all right, we're back to our regular lives. I want to start a new quiet time. I want to start a new Bible study. I want to be more focused on what He has called me to do and what I should do to draw closer to Him. And we look at this and we're like, man, we're on the mountaintop. It's so great, so comfortable. It's easy to talk to God. Then all of a sudden, we start to see that we start to move towards the mountain. I'm going to start moving from the mountain to the valley. And so we see a couple things that this is a movement of action. It calls us to move to action, to realize going, okay, we're around this. Everything's going great, but we still need to focus on God. We still need to focus on Jesus. We still need to pour into ourselves. We still need to open His Word and study. So that call to action is to realize, to move, and remember that Jesus has already done something, what He's already done, but we can't stay there. If we all could stay on the mountaintop, we'd all be super happy right now. And we all want to go backwards to climb and get up that mountain because now we're on the top and like we're going over and we're like, no. It always reminds me of like a little kid trying to come out of a grocery store, especially when they're in trouble. They're like kicking and clawing and like their parents are dragging them out like going, you're embarrassing us. Come on, don't do this. And that's the way we fight to try to stay on that top of that mountain. We try to be like that little kid like, no. My mom, and she's going to kill me if she ever hears this, she was always the mom to spank first, ask questions later. And so you didn't mess up. I would get spanked in church. I would get popped. And then she would just give me that look. And that look, what it meant was, I got you now. Wait till after church. We're going to talk. But see, here's the thing. I don't ever remember talking. All right? No, there was no talking. It was always a whooping all the way till I got to Mama's house. And then once we got from there, Mama got me because then she's like, what are you doing? Don't be a knucklehead. So, so we're always kicking and screaming to that point. And this is the way that we feel. We're on this mountaintop. We're remembering that God has done so much. He's doing some great things in our lives, and we enjoy it, and we want to stay there. But then we keep moving. We keep continuing to grow, and we realize we can't stay there. And we look back, and we're like, yeah, that mountain's awesome. And so now we're motivated to move forward, and we know that Jesus is and has always been there. But we forget what He's done. We forget that He's trying to move us, trying to continue to grow us, that where He separates us from the large crowd, sets us into the boat, and sends us on ahead while He goes and He prays and He spends time with the Father Himself. And we forget this. And so we got to look at this, that this is our past. And our past will always be our past and it will always be there. But we got to continue moving forward. To the point, we're going to pick up in verse 25. And it says, shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. And when the disciples saw Him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus reached out His hand and called him. You of little faith, He said, why did you doubt? So here, we are in our present. We're in our day-to-day lives. The disciples they've just witnessed this awesome thing to where He fed multiple thousands of people. And they collected leftovers. I don't know about you, I love leftovers, all right? So if you guys ever have leftovers and I come over, you know, it might get cleaned out. I don't know. We'll see. But I love leftovers. It's just awesome. That meal heated up again for a second, maybe third day. Sometimes it get a little crazy and go a week. Melanie's like, that's gross. But, you know, leftovers are so great. To where I've been like going, oh my gosh, we got a lot of food. This is awesome. But the disciples are so focused on the storm. They're so focused on what's going on to where they're like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden they're in the middle of a lake and they see like, what is this? Fear struck upon them, to where this was their response. This is their response. They're going, what? There's a ghost. I don't know what that is. It's walking on the water. How do we get out of here? And they're trying to like throw water, and the craze, and wind and waves are crashing, and they're freaking out. They're freaking out to the point to where everything around them is coming to the point of crashing. Everything's falling in to where they're like, it's a ghost. We got to get out of here, guys. I don't want to be here. Let's get out. I'll swim. I don't care. Or we might be too close to the waves. We're going to crash. And so much stuff come up. So many decisions, so many consequences, and so many bad ways to respond happen. To where I love what the Scripture says. It says they cried out in fear. They cried out in fear to the point that they responded negatively. Looking back to where we were in Florida, now hindsight's always 20/20. I realized we could look back and see that we could have responded a lot better. We could have tried a little bit harder. We could have gotten out of that funk of going, well, man, this is not what I wanted. You know, why couldn't it be just so easy? It's always easy for everyone else. You know, our jobs, I don't want to do this the rest of my life. I don't enjoy this. It's just a job. I'm tired. I'm wore out. I'm a cranky little toddler, stomping my feet going, I don't want to do this. But we look at it and we see that even when the waves are crashing in, Jesus is still bigger than our problem. Still bigger than our problem to where we don't even focus or pay attention to it. We see the problem and realize we're all alone. Instead of seeing that Jesus is bigger than that problem and that this is us, we're out in faith, we're following, we're stepping, but everything's coming in on us, and we take it upon ourselves. And when that happens, we lose sight of how big and how small that problem really is and how big Jesus really is. And we see that he'll never leave us in our circumstances, to where Peter here, I love Peter. I feel like that's us in a nutshell. And a lot of people, I always get asked a lot of times, like, why does Peter kind of look like the bad toad around here? He's just us. He's easy to put his foot in his mouth, and we are too. If we don't sit back and think, and I love it to where we see Peter, he steps out in boldness, and he looks past all the other guys, even though he's scared, and he goes, Lord, you know, if it is you, call me out. Let's do this. I want to trust you because I've seen what you've done. And so Jesus' response to this was awesome. Because once they were afraid, he said, hey, don't be afraid. It's me. Guys, come on. What are you doing? You know, I see Jesus looking at these guys going, come on, get it. Come on, get it. You know, I feel like Jesus does that to me a lot of times going, man, what did you just talk about yesterday? Come on, let's do this. And so we see, he says, take courage, don't be afraid. Here, and Peter says, call me out on the water. And Jesus' response was so simple. So easy to where a lot of times we want to hear the big, elaborate answer. We want to hear the part from Scripture where it's like written out in a sign on the wall throughout the sky going, okay, that's clear enough, I can see it. But even when he writes it out that clear and so simple, we still miss the message here to where he just says, come. He says, come. So here's Peter stepping out of the boat. And at first thought, he's like, oh man, this is awesome. And all the other disciples are still afraid, going, what are you doing? Don't get out the boat. This is safe. This is safety. But he steps out on the water and starts to walk on the water. Starts going towards Jesus. And he's probably going, oh my gosh, this is awesome. I can see him dancing, like going, oh. And started walking towards Jesus. Then his problems around him get bigger than where his focus is. He starts to see the wind. He starts to see the waves. He starts to see them all coming around to where he loses the faith and he's like, Jesus, save me, I'm going down. Here's Jesus. He reaches down, he grabs him, and he says this. I want you to listen. In verse 31, he says, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and called him. He said, you of little faith. Just listen to that. Jesus called him out and says, you of little faith. Ouch. That's harsh. Jesus says, you have little faith. And he says, why have you doubted? Doubted. And this is where our response usually gets so negative. We know that we're supposed to respond. We respond to where we accept Jesus, who he is and what he has done. And be reminded of everything he's done. And now we're called to accept. But yet, when we accept, we do it half-heartedly. We step out on the water and we'll be like, oh, I'm coming, Jesus, here we go. And then we're like, what am I doing? I'm crazy. This defies physics. At that point in time, everything that we don't know, we sometimes feel like we're Einstein and like involved in physics to where we're like, wait a minute, this is not possible. Why are we doing this? This is crazy. I can't swim. I forgot my floaties at home. And we start thinking of all the things that we need, and we don't accept that Jesus has called us out. And he's saying, come, just come. Test it, try it, see what we have. But just stay focused right here. To where horses, drawn buggies going down the road, they always have the horses with the blinders on. And a lot of people I've had ask me several times, why is that? And I was like, well, think about it. First off, a horse's eyes are on the side of its head, not right in front like ours. They can see a little bit more further around than what we can. And so if you block that off, they don't see the cars. They don't see the things that could potentially harm them because they know as well cars will hurt if they hit you. And so they put these things on to keep them focused on their line of sight. And so I can see Jesus standing here on the water, and Peter's getting out of the boat. And Peter's so focused. And he's stepping on the water. He's testing it. He's like, okay, all right, I got this. And he steps out. And then he's like, oh, this is awesome. And he's so excited. But his excitement swells up so fast to where his brain and his mind affects to where he's going, wait a minute, that's a wave coming in. This is the wind. Everything's going out here. I'm soaked. Why am I drenched? Oh my gosh, the boat's gone. Where did the boat go? And he looked around and got pulled off course. Got so pulled off course that he doubted. He doubted that this was even possible when he was doing it. So it shows us that even when we're doing the impossible, when Jesus is leading our lives, we still will doubt and go, wait a minute, is this possible? We still ask those questions. We still get those responses to where, why are we doing this? Well, what's going on? And it's good to ask questions, but if you respond in the wrong way, your faith seems so small to where at that point you're trying to do things on your own power. Trying to do things to the own point to where when we doubt God or ourselves, we fall. We lose the grip of life. We don't accept that Jesus is who he says he is. We don't accept that Jesus is doing the things that we don't see. We get so focused on me. We get so focused on things in our own lives that we can care less what's really going on around us. We don't accept the reality of our present, that Jesus is there, guiding, protecting, and leading. And we begin to lose grip on that life. We fall. And just like Peter, we're all calling, saying, Jesus, save me. Jesus, save me. And look at Jesus' response. He could be like, you little faith, you have no part of this. But he says, no. Why did you doubt? And he reaches down and grabs him by the hand, pulls him up, puts him back on the water, and as we'll see, they'll walk back to the boat. To where Jesus is there, even in the midst of stuff, we just have to accept that he is who he says he is. We have to accept that he is the guy that put us on that mountaintop in the first place, but that he has separated us to teach us, continue to teach us, even when we've seen such great stuff on the mountaintop. But we have to accept that he's doing even more than we could even see. To where we learn that we accept God and we don't let go. And he'll walk us back to the boat the way he does with Peter. And that we can't save ourselves. Because if we try to save ourselves, we're swimming and we're treading water. We don't get very far. Because, I mean, we could probably tread water for a good 2, 3 minutes, 5 minutes if we had to. But after that, we're all going, oh, I got a cramp. I'm just going to go down. It's over. It's worthless. We're going under. And we leave it at that point there. So this leads us into our next point. Now that you've remembered who God is and what He has done, and you accept Jesus for who He is and what He's doing and that He's still working in your lives, next is the trust. And trust. A lot of us come from different backgrounds, different areas to where trust is very hard to come by. Trust is something that we're like, I want to trust, but I've been hurt too many times. I want to trust, but it's never worked out that well. So we'll pick up in verse 32. And it says, and when they had climbed back into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped Him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. And when they had crossed over, they landed at Gesheth. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick to Him and begged Him to let the sick touch the edge of His cloak or the hem of His garment. And all who had touched it were healed. So here we see that there's something in our future that God is doing that's even bigger than our problems of stepping out of the boat. Stepping out of the boat to walk with something that we can do personally away from the crowds. What we do in our personal, private life with Jesus, we step out and we look at Him and we say, Jesus, I know You're still in control and You still have my life. I don't want to doubt no more. I don't want to have a small faith. I want to accept. But now we have to trust that the future is bigger than what we have going on. Bigger than anything in our lives, to where we see that when we trust, He will pull us out of the valley. And what this is that we're in the valley. We don't go through the valley just because and stay in the valley and wait till Jesus pulls us and puts us back on the mountaintop going, oh man, I'm so glad I'm out of that. I'm back on the mountaintop. That's where I want to stay. And then we go right back into it again. So it's like a roller coaster, up and down, up and down. But it's one of these that Jesus is not on the mountaintop where we got to go to Him. We're in the valley and Jesus comes down to us. When we doubt, when we have little faith, Jesus still comes to us. He doesn't just wipe us off. He comes back to us. And He just asks us to trust that He has our future in a bigger pot than what we could even see. He wants us to trust to the point that as we walk back to the boat, we're trusting Him. We're going, man, we are walking on water. To where the people around, once they got back in, they saw the storm died. And everything was great. And they were like, man, that was crazy. Jesus was still doing this. And I mean, I can see the disciples looking at Peter going, Peter, man, you fell in the water. But then Peter could look back and go, yeah, you guys didn't get out of the boat. I got to walk with Jesus on the water. And now their faith has grown even more to where they can start trusting that something bigger and better is about to happen. Do they know what it is? Absolutely not. Because they weren't thinking or listening and understanding exactly everything Jesus was talking about. So we start to see that we can trust that He's doing something even bigger if He hadn't told us, that we wouldn't even believe it. Now, when we see this, we hear that, and we know that God is doing something bigger than what we see around us. Because we get to see a little snippet of what's happening in our lives and the lives of people around us. But this is something that has been repeated. This is something that is constantly being seen. We all can agree and say, yeah, God is doing something bigger than we could even imagine. We know He's got this plan. We don't know what it's going to look like. And if He told us, there's no way we could even fathom. But if we go back to the book of Habakkuk. Now, when I talk about Habakkuk, I'm probably going to butcher it because of my accent and everything there. So just bear with me. It's okay. So Habakkuk here. If we go back to the very first chapter, we see Habakkuk. He's a prophet of God. And a lot of people, they have this idea of what a prophet is like they're people chosen by God to deliver God's message. That is awesome. But when we read Habakkuk, we see a very different portrayal of a prophet. We see a guy that's angry. We see a guy that's trying to figure out what's going on, to where he complains to God, not once, not twice, 3 times he complains to God. He complains to God. How crazy is that? I mean, how many of us can be like, I'm going to complain to God, like, he doesn't know what he's doing? That's foolishness to us, right? But we have this book in Habakkuk here, and we see that Habakkuk is playing. He's going, God, we're your chosen people. There's injustice happening. There's bad things happening, and you're not doing anything. Why? Why you're not doing anything? And the craziest thing about it is when we get bold enough to complain and see and speak back to God the way Habakkuk does, God gives him a blunt answer, but not the one that he wanted, but something that was far greater than he could even imagine. To where in Habakkuk 1:5, he says this. He says, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told. So here's God looking at Habakkuk and going, listen, I'm already doing something. Yeah, you can keep complaining. That's fine. But I want you to know I'm doing something. Doing something that is far greater than what is going on. The injustice going on with you. Your people being sued, being lied about, being robbed, being beaten. All this terrible stuff that's happening is part of something I have going on because I'm doing something even far greater than what you see right now. Right now, you're asking about a portion of the time it's okay, but there's something better that's going along with this. And he says, because if I told you what was really going on, your mind would be blown. You wouldn't even understand. You'd be going, what? That would be our response. That would be our response. And so we see this where even Habakkuk complains again, even knowing and hearing this. Because, again, his mind was blown because it was God doing something. He was responding, but it wasn't the way Habakkuk wanted. Because we see that God was going to use the Babylonians to take them, the Israelites, captive and take them into prisoner and to punish all the people that were doing the Israelites wrong. But the Israelites were going to be swept up into what was doing this. He was using this other nation that was far worse than the ones they were in, being beaten by. And Habakkuk looks at it and goes, wait a minute. I know who you are, God. We know who you are. You're a just God. You're this type of God. We know you get angry. We know you take revenge. We know you do all this stuff. Why would you use those people? They're crazy. Why? And God responds again to where he simply says, if I told you even more, you wouldn't understand. You just have to trust me. That's what he's trying to get to that point to where as we're walking on water, we see that Peter is walking beside Jesus and he says, trust me. And got this to where they got back in the boat and they were all worshiping, praising God to where they got to the next town. They got to the next town to where people heard that Jesus was there and people came from miles around just to touch the hem of his garment, to touch his cloak for something to happen. Because their faith was so huge because they cared and focused on who Jesus was. But Jesus took the disciples away to take their faith even deeper. So not be so focused on their position or their title or their rank or anything, but that they can just focus and solely know who Jesus was, to be able to tell that to other people, going, I've seen stuff greater, far greater than you could even imagine. And if I told you, you wouldn't get it. As we look back to when we were in Florida, Melanie and I, we grumbled, we complained about our jobs, we complained about everything that was going on, to where God was doing something far greater than we even knew, to where we ended up here in Dalton. We ended up here to where that period in time in Florida was a learning, growing period. And looking back, we didn't respond well. We didn't respond. I felt like Habakkuk, looking back, trying to arm wrestle God and saying, I got this. I got my guns. I'm going to slam it down. And God just rips my arm completely off and says, just sit back and watch. So it comes down to our future. We have to trust that God is doing something. That we trust him so much that we just want to touch the hem of his garment. We want to have that kind of faith to where people will come around and go, you know what? You guys believe in something with Jesus. I want to know what it is. I just want to get to the point that I touch his garment. Tell me about it. Tell me how, to where Jesus is like, just tell people about what he has done in your life. Share what he has done, not get so focused on what you want to do and you think that Jesus wants you to do. But you look back and you're like, you know what? Remember this mountain over here? I want to get back to that point. But why do I want to try to climb back up this side of the mountain? Let's go this way and see where it's happening. We remember all the good things. And we look forward to what's going on. We want the band to come back up as we're going to sing about one more song, but we want to focus on this to this point that we look at what God is doing. We start to learn to trust that He has our future, even if we have no idea what it is. We look at the different things that we all have disappointments and struggles about. Think about the medical diagnosis that can come up, the loss of a loved one. Some of y'all might even have kids that have drifted away from the Lord, drifted away from what you have taught them. And you're pleading with God, going, God, what else can I do? What else do I have to do to get their attention? And Jesus is reminding, going, you're doing everything you can to stay focused on me. Stay focused that I'm calling you out into the water. Stay focused that I'm calling you to walk to me. Don't worry about the waves. Don't worry about the water around. Don't worry about anything else. But focus and trust me and accept me in the present and in your future. To where we start to look at this and we know that life is hard. We know that our valleys get deeper. And life is a struggle. It's a struggle to the point that we try to claw our ways out. And we end up more damaged. We end up more battered because we try to do it on our own strength. We try to do it without focusing on who Jesus is. Because this is our natural tendency. This is our natural way to respond. When things go wrong, I got this. Because we feel like we are well rested enough to be able to handle stuff. But Jesus says, no, you're not. Don't let your natural tendency to respond to be in the hard way of doing things. It's time for us to pick ourselves up off the floor. Because that's where we end up, is laying on the floor. God didn't create us to be there on the floor. He didn't create us to pick ourselves back up and dust us off and then keep moving to a certain level to reach God. Jesus came down and He walked with us, talked with us. He created us for that relationship, created us for a relationship with Him, to where He wants us to remember, to accept, and to trust.